So the next phylum that we'll explore is Phylum Annelida. Again, as a super quick recap, we're in Metazoa, we're in the true animals, Eumetazoa, we're in bilateral, we're in protostomes, and we're in Lophotrochozoa. And now here we are in Annelida. And Annelida are worms. We've talked quite a bit about worms so far, but these are the worms you think of when someone says worms, right? These are the earthworms. These are the things that you see after a rainstorm or when you're digging in the ground. So these are the worms that you're more familiar with. Maybe you weren't as familiar with, say, our roundworms or the flatworms. So in general, Phylum Annelida is the segmented worms. So these guys, when you look at them, particularly if you imagine an earthworm, you have all of these hundreds upon hundreds of segments, hence the name segmented worms. Honestly, they kind of look like millipedes or centipedes, just without the legs. So in Phylum Annelida, we will end up talking about two different classes in them, but these include things like the earthworms and something called polychaetes. Polychaetes are marine worms, or at least there's tons of marine worms. They're just one group of marine worms, and that's what this picture of this red worm is. Their symmetry is bilateral. That's a little bit easier to see in this polychaete picture. So kind of running down the middle of it. Same with an earthworm as well. It's running down the middle and there is a clear left and right side. Now, because these organisms are round, particularly our earthworms, it might be kind of hard to imagine that they're bilateral. You might argue, well, they're a tube. I can split that tons of different ways. But there is a clear line of symmetry, especially when you open it up. If you were to dissect an earthworm, you would clearly see organs on the left and right hand side, which is why they're considered bilateral. These organisms are triploblasts, so they have the endo, ecto, and mesoderm. And because they're triploblasts, that means we can organize them as being a pseudo or eucoelomate. If we take a look at this diagram over here, again, here's our blue ectoderm, our yellow endoderm, and then this pinkish area is the mesoderm. And you can see that this mesoderm is arranged in such a way that it has a body cavity that is insulated by the mesoderm on all sides. And pretty much all the other organisms we're going to talk about in Kingdom Animalia are these eucoelomates. The only exceptions that we'll talk about is platyhelminthes, which were the acoelomates, and nematodes, which were our pseudocoelomates. And then finally, digestion. These guys do have complete digestion, meaning that they have two openings to their digestive system, one end being the mouth and the other end being the anus. And because they have complete digestion, that means we can use the term protostome or deuterostome. And in this case, these organisms are protostomes. So let's take a look at class Polychaeta. You likely haven't seen these guys before, but I like to introduce them, one, because they just look super cool, and two, I like to use it as a way to describe some of the words that are in the name. So we have poly. Poly means many, and chaetae means chaetae, so it's many chaetae. And what the chaetae are these kind of bristles that you're seeing along here. So all of these little bristles are the chaetae. And as a polychaete, they have tons of them. We're going to talk about earthworms in a little bit, which don't have that many. And so this is a huge group of worms. In general, they're called polychaetes, but there's tons of different types of polychaetes. And instead of just showing you a bunch of pictures, I'm going to have you take a look at this video in just a moment that shows you the crazy diversity of our marine worms. Now, I will say they mention a couple species names. Don't worry about the species names. You don't need to write them down, but it's really just to kind of show you this really cool diversity of organisms that exist that we didn't even realize that exists. So go ahead and pause here. There's a video popping up above me. Go ahead and go watch that before coming back. So again, cool and huge diversity of our polychaetes. If you guys ever go scuba diving, you might actually get lucky enough to see some of those. The next, and I guess final class of our annelids we'll talk about is class Oligochaetae. So these are things like our earthworms. So again, chaetae means chaetae, is referring to these fine bristles, and then oligo means few. Not a lot. So poly means a lot of chaetae. Oligochaetae means not that much chaetae. And the chaetae they have, not only do they not have a lot of them, they're also quite small. It helps them in gripping things, but otherwise they don't use them as much as we saw in our polychaetes. Now here I actually have a diagram of an earthworm that I do want you guys to draw in your notes and also to label. Mainly because you've seen earthworms before, and it's kind of cool just to know a little bit more about them. So if you think about an earthworm, the way to orient yourself is to first look at this clitellum. So the clitellum is this little band that is found on the earthworm, and it's always found on one side or closer to one side than on the other side. So you're never going to find an earthworm where the clitellum is right in the middle. It is always closer to one of the edges. And particularly with earthworms, it is always found on the edge closest to the mouth. So although the mouth and the anus on an earthworm pretty much look exactly the same, you can tell which side is the front, which side is the mouth, just based on where the clitellum is. So again, the mouth is closest to the clitellum, whereas the anus is the furthest part from the clitellum. There are chaetae on it. If you are looking at an earthworm, if there's an earthworm in your hand, you're not going to be able to see the chaetae. You might be able to see them on a dissecting scope, but they are very fine. Again, I don't want to say they're useless, but they don't have as much of a use as compared to the much larger chaetae found in our polychaetes. Let's talk a little bit more about this clitellum. So earthworms are kind of cool. There's actually quite a few organisms like this. They are hermaphroditic, which means that they have the capability of creating both eggs and sperm. Now we've talked about the tubularians in our flatworms, how they're also hermaphroditic. They also create eggs and sperm, but for them there is a clear mom and a clear dad. They fight for those roles. Earthworms, also hermaphroditic, also have the ability to make eggs and sperm, but they aren't fighting over it. Two earthworms will come together, they're going to line up, and they actually exchange their sperm between the two of them so that they both fertilize their eggs and they both become, I guess, pregnant, so to speak. Now, where that happens is the clitellum. So if you've ever touched an earthworm, you're like, ooh, there's this cool band. You have just touched its reproductive organs. That is where the sperm comes out to fertilize the egg. So that's the whole function of the clitellum. So just keep that in mind next time you're hanging out with an earthworm. So that's pretty much the end of our annelids. So just kind of talking a little bit about organisms that you guys might see in your daily lives, particularly our oligochaetes. I will end this video just telling you to go watch this video that's going to pop up in a moment. It's all about earthworms and just some cool facts about earthworms. There's an earthworm scientist in the UK. She's like super passionate about worms. Imagine how I am about birds. That's how she is about worms. She'll tell you how you can find worms. So just watch that video. She also talks a little bit more about the hermaphroditic nature of earthworms, which is really what I want you guys to focus on, but you'll learn some other cool, interesting information about earthworms as well. So again, this is the end of this video. I'm going to end this video with this new YouTube video popping up about earthworms, so go watch that before moving on with the lecture series.